Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into Lesson U10 LO3, Economics, Stagflation, Energy Pressure, and Protest Politics, Capstone Reflection. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this wild period in U.S. history. We're going to unpack an era that totally transformed how America interacts with the world, how our economy actually functions, and how everyday people react when the system is under immense strain. Let's get right into it.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll tackle a big misconception, then look at the evidence surrounding war, protest, and energy pressure. After that, we'll break down a worked example of stagflation, do a quick student check to apply what we've learned, and wrap it all up with a transfer and recap.
Section 1. The misconception, the myth of the isolated economy.
So, we've got to start by tackling a massive misconception about how the U.S. economy actually works. It's really easy to look at price tags at the grocery store or the gas pump and think, oh, this is just a local issue, or that a president can just push a giant red button on their desk and fix the economy. But nope. Our domestic finances are deeply, intricately tied to global events and foreign policy. There's no magic lever in the Oval Office. As you'll see through our sources today, the U.S. economy is incredibly vulnerable to international crises. It absolutely does not exist in a vacuum. To understand what's happening in our own backyards, we have to look across our borders.
Section 2. Evidence, War and Protest. Specifically, the strain of Vietnam.
To find the evidence for this interconnectedness, we really need to look at the massive domestic and international toll of the Vietnam War. This wasn't just a military conflict, right? It was an economic and social earthquake. Following President Nixon taking office in 1969, he initially tried to buy some time by pulling some troops out while simultaneously ramping up battlefield pressure. But things dramatically escalated in April 1970 with the U.S. and South Vietnamese incursion into Cambodia, which was aimed at clearing out North Vietnamese base camps. Ultimately, the administration navigated a peace settlement in 1973, and the war officially concluded in 1975.
Now, domestically, the fallout was brutal. The sheer cost of the war, stacked on top of President Johnson's earlier Great Society social programs, put a massive fiscal strain on the U.S. budget. And the social strain was just as intense. That 1970 Cambodia incursion sparked fierce, violent protests on college campuses all over the country. This unrest tragically culminated on May 4th at Kent State University, where 4 students were killed. The nation was literally stretched to its breaking point, both financially and emotionally.
Moving on to Section 3. Evidence, the energy pressure, focusing on the 1973 oil embargo.
Right as the U.S. was grappling with the aftermath of Vietnam, a totally different kind of crisis was brewing on the global stage. During the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, Arab members of OPEC retaliated against U.S. support for Israel. How? By completely banning petroleum exports to the U.S. and other targeted nations, and slashing overall oil production. This slammed into an American economy that was already super vulnerable. We had declining domestic oil reserves, and the global monetary system was in chaos after the U.S. severed the dollar's tie to gold. Essentially, oil was weaponized.
And nothing illustrates this shock to the system quite like the number 4. The price of a barrel of global oil doubled, and then it quadrupled. Think about what a quadrupling of energy costs does to everyday life. It forced skyrocketing prices onto consumers. We're talking incredibly long lines at gas stations, people panicking, and this sudden, massive jump in energy costs threatened to throw the whole global economy into a severe recession.
Section 4. Worked example, stagflation, or as I like to call it, the perfect economic storm.
So, when you smash together the massive fiscal strain of a long war and a sudden gigantic energy shock, you get our worked example for today. Economists actually had to invent a brand new word just to describe the mess they were seeing. Enter stagflation. This is an incredibly painful and unusual condition where you have high inflation and high unemployment happening at the exact same time. Historically, economists thought you either got inflation with a booming economy or unemployment with a slowing economy. Having both, prices shooting through the roof while people are losing their jobs and growth is totally stagnant, that was literally the worst-case scenario.
Let's break down how this happened step by step. First, we had sky-high government spending from Vietnam and the Great Society initiatives. Second, the Federal Reserve accommodated all that debt by pumping up the money supply, basically printing money without the old anchor of the gold standard to keep it in check. And third, those severe energy shortages from the OPEC embargoes drove up the cost of manufacturing and transporting, well, pretty much everything.
Just look at how inflation exploded during this time. In 1964, inflation was sitting pretty at just 1%. A decade later, in 1974, it had rocketed up to 12%, and by the summer of 1980, it peaked at over 14.5%. That is massive. Meanwhile, unemployment was also climbing, hovering above 7.5%. As you can imagine, the American public was rapidly losing confidence in the economy and in the government's ability to fix it.
This combo of high unemployment and runaway inflation totally broke the accepted economic rulebook of the time, something called the Phillips curve, which basically assumed you could trade higher inflation for lower unemployment. Well, that clearly wasn't working. To stop this destructive cycle, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker stepped in and took aggressive action in 1979. His strategy was tough: tightly control reserve growth and dramatically hike up interest rates. The medicine was bitter, causing a really harsh recession from 1981 to 1982, where unemployment peaked near 11%. But it worked. It ultimately conquered the great inflation and brought price stability back to the economy.
Section 5. Application. Student check. Let's do a quick claim, evidence, and reasoning.
All right, let's test our understanding of how these complex historical threads tie together. Using a claim, evidence, and reasoning framework is the best way to really lock this in. So, what if our claim is that the 1970s economic crisis was entirely a domestic issue that the president could fix alone? Let's look at our evidence. We have the massive fiscal strain of the Vietnam War, the Fed's unanchored monetary policy, and the massive external shock of the 1973 OPEC oil embargo. Putting that together, our reasoning tells us that the claim is 100% false. The crisis was deeply intertwined with global events and foreign policy. It proves, once and for all, that the economy doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Section 6. Transfer and recap. The lasting legacy.
Let's look at how the chaos of the 1970s forced the U.S. to fundamentally rethink its approach to energy and money. The struggles of this era left a legacy we are still navigating right now. To cushion against future shocks, the U.S. created the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and even slapped a national 55-mile-per-hour speed limit on highways to conserve fuel. Politically, they established the cabinet-level Department of Energy in 1977 to get a handle on all this. Economically, the Federal Reserve learned some really hard lessons and committed to specific numerical targets for inflation to keep things anchored. Plus, the push for alternative energy finally got some real momentum, eventually leading to the 2001 creation of the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy to advance solar, wind, and biomass power.
As we wrap up this capstone reflection for Lesson U10-LO3 Economics, Stagflation, Energy Pressure, and Protest Politics Capstone Reflection, it is just so clear how interconnected history truly is. Foreign policy decisions in Vietnam and the Middle East rippled straight into the wallets and gas tanks of everyday Americans, fundamentally altering macroeconomic policy and energy strategies for decades. I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. Based on what we've learned from the 1970s, how is our modern economy still being shaped by our reliance on global energy today? Think about the headlines you see right now about inflation, gas prices, and global conflicts. The echoes of the 1970s are still very much with us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring these incredible historical connections.